So I do have a confession. I hate talking about money, and the thought of talking about stewardship 2 Sundays in a row actually has me on the brink of a panic attack. But I love you guys so much. I can do this. I confess I also had to pay my nieces to let me use them in a story this morning. So I was being a good steward of my resources. But I'm an aunt to 4 of the most wonderful nieces, and an aunt to 2 of the most amazing nephews, and a soon-to-be aunt for the 7th time for my sister's wonderful daughter or amazing son that is due in June. I learned a long time ago that my nieces and nephews seem to think that I know every answer in the world. And I don't, but I guess I do a good enough job at pretending that I do, that I am the authority on all things, believe it or not. So when asked a question, I have to come up with the most correct one, and also the one that will keep me out of the most trouble with my brother and sister. I live with my brother's family as I'm saving up to buy a house, which is a very scary prospect on my own, but it means right now I get to be a full-time aunt to 3 of my nieces day and night. As my 6-year-old niece crawled in bed with me last night with the, "I can't sleep," which was code for, "You're watching a movie and I'm not, and I want to join you." And many of you guys have seen my nieces running around the church, and my brother and his family are Catholic. So for me being Protestant and the girls being Catholic, we have had many conversations. In fact, we had one at March on Hunger where the Albrights were sitting in front of us, and maybe you heard snippets of, "So you're not Catholic, Aunt Maudie?" "No, I'm not." "So you're not Catholic?" "No." "Do you love Jesus?" "Absolutely, but you're not Catholic." "No." And this is a pretty constant refrain in our house. "So you're not Catholic?" "No." And all of my attempts to explain the Protestant Reformation to an 11, 9, and 6-year-old have completely, utterly failed. But that's not to say that they haven't taught me a lot about life and faith and how to love God. I don't know what other families do, but my brother and sister have taught their children to save their money in different ways. And so the girls here have occupied 9 canning jars, 3 apiece, 1 jar for money that they can spend, 1 jar for money that they can save, and the 3rd jar for money that they are to share. So there's actually no problem with the girls dividing up the money. In fact, that's 33.33% of every birthday money, Christmas money, lemonade stand money goes into each of these jars. So when it comes down to buying things, I think Janae has the hardest time at 6 years old because she's had a $20 bill in her jar for over a year and doesn't understand that you can get change for it to spend it. So I think the child has spent it 5 times over with my money of, "I have money at home, but I like it." So we're working on getting her to understand this. But as they're sharing and they're saving and they're spending, we've had lots of conversations, and no one has ever told the girls where they needed to share their money. Rachel's the oldest, and she shares all of her money with the Boise Zoo. She, in fact, saved her money to buy a brick at the zoo for the family. She dutifully feeds the goats every single time we go, and they have eaten a hole in my jacket or scarf or pants, and she loves those slobbering monsters. She raises money for the rainforest, and any little change box at the zoo, that's where Rachel's share money goes. Emily is 9. She feels called to share her money with St. Mark's Catholic Church. She was so proud yesterday to receive mail from the church, her very own envelope addressed to Miss Emily Grace with her giving statement for 2012, all $3.67. And she couldn't have been more proud. And her sister, her older sister, made fun of her, of course, and Janae thought she was just amazing. And my brother and sister-in-law were very proud of her. And I looked at Emily and I said, congratulations, this is a huge thing that you've done. And she said, I can do better. I'm going to double it this year. I think that is wonderful and ambitious. But Janae is still figuring out what to do with her share jar. So at first she thought it meant share her money with her sisters. Well, then we had to give the sisters to give it back to Janae. And then it was share money with mom and dad. And then we got that back from Janae, and they call me Aunt Maudie, and so it was share money with Aunt Maudie. And I gave it back to her, and she just couldn't figure out what to do. And so for the umpteenth time I'm given a fistful of change, I told her to get her coat and her share jar and her sisters, and we hopped in the car shortly before Christmas so we could see all the different places Janae could share her money. Well, our adventure took us to Fred Meyer's gas station, where Janae is sitting in the car and she sees a person with a bell and a red kettle. So I'm filling up the car and I get back in and she said, Aunt Maudie, why is that person ringing a bell? It's so cold outside. And I explained to her about the Salvation Army and what they do to help people. And she said, oh my goodness, I think that's how I want to use my share money this month. I want to help people in need. I said, okay. So we parked the car and we went into the store. And, she loved the sound of the pink, 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 pink of the change hitting the bottom of the kettle. And she made it very clear to the gentleman bell ringer and said, this month you can have my share money to help people, but next month someone else gets it. I thought it was completely wonderful until the end of Christmas, when every bit of my pocket change suddenly became share money for the Salvation Army. And it's not the first Salvation Army experience I've had with a niece or nephew. In fact, my nephew, about 3 years ago, tried to petition a particular bell ringer in Longview, Texas, to change the name of the Salvation Army to Grace or Mercy or Love, because Jesus doesn't need an army for salvation. And I thought, here we go again. I'm very proud of Janae and all of my nieces for making a very grown-up decision to share their money. Our scripture lesson this morning talks about giving in a slightly different way when we hear the story of the widow's mite, found in Mark 12. Jesus sat across from the collection box for the temple treasury and observed how the crowd gave their money. Many rich people were throwing in lots of money. One poor widow came forward and put 2 small coins worth a penny. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I assure you that this poor widow has put in more than anyone who has been putting money in the treasury. All of them are giving of their spare change, but she, from her hopeless poverty, has given everything she had, even what she needed to live on. The woman at the temple, the widow at the temple, was a poor widow, but she was not poor simply because she was a widow. My understanding of sociology and economics in the first century Palestine tells me there was no such thing as a rich widow in that culture. Women were totally dependent on men for their livelihood. To be widowed meant something worse than losing someone that you loved. It meant losing your livelihood, being totally dependent on the kindness of male relatives, to have someone in the community feed her, perhaps give her some spare change. 2 coins in the woman's hand were probably all that she had, and the truth is these coins were not going to change her life. When you have so little, a penny doesn't matter all that much. It does not move you from welfare to work. But she could be at peace and be joyful in knowing she was able to give to the temple treasury, because with or without these coins, she was still a dependent person. Could there be a picture of someone more selfless than this woman? She didn't give from her abundance. She didn't give from what was left over. She gave from the very depths of her being. This morning, we could talk about the sacrificial nature of her gift, giving all that she had, or we could look at her gift as an investment in hope. She didn't focus on what she didn't have. She could have freaked out. She could have prayed for God to change her circumstances dramatically. She could have hoarded those coins. But she didn't do those things at all. She gave selflessly. She gave selflessly and drew the attention of someone else who gave selflessly. Jesus points out this gift to his disciples to make a point not just about giving in a sacrificial nature, but giving as an investment in hope. Jesus gave all that he had for us as an investment in hope. Jesus didn't hold back. Jesus certainly didn't play it safe. Jesus didn't care about being popular. Jesus did the tough stuff. He said the things that needed to be said, whether people wanted to hear them or not. Sometimes he was unpopular. Jesus didn't care for just the people he liked or people who were religious. He didn't heal just the people who were a little sick. He healed people who were super sick and gooey sick. And he did that because he loved everyone, because he didn't hold back. There are so many examples of people who don't hold back. We could think of plenty of them. I'm sure everyone has a story of someone they know who gives selflessly. As I've been working in confirmation and steeped in looking at John Wesley for the umpteenth time, Wesley came to my mind as somebody who didn't hold back, who had a very interesting emphasis on stewardship. It began with his theological understanding that everything we are and have comes from God. God is at the very beginning of our existence. We did not bring it about ourselves. We are not the creator, we are the created. We did not create the materials that we use to make various items. God provided us with life. But more importantly, God provides us with the grace that leads to life eternal. Just as our lives come from God, we use the gifts of life, the grace that God has given us, as offerings back to God. Therefore, Wesley emphasized both an inward and outward holiness and how much it matters. How we respond to various circumstances, how we utilize our time, how we spend our funds, how we treat one another can be gifts to God and reflect the ways that we love God. And one of John Wesley's most famous pieces of advice, which a lot of financial people have seemed to latch onto, is the earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. But I sometimes think people focus so much on the first two that they forget about the third. And really, it should go like this: earn all you can so you can save all you can, so you can give all you can. Wesley put restrictions on the ways that we can earn all we can because he didn't want us to harm ourselves by becoming workaholics, by sacrificing our spiritual lives, by lying or cheating or stealing. Wesley didn't want us to earn all we can on the backs of other people by hurting their physical abilities, their spiritual abilities. Wesley encouraged us to have business conducting to the ways that we love God. In another way, when we save all we can, it's not about hoarding. It's not about getting the good deal on that really cute pair of shoes or buying something on sale, because what we buy matters as much as what we pay for it. But what it meant was taking care of our own needs. Need is a big word in my house. I rail on my nieces for not being able to distinguish their wants from their needs. And yet I have a hard time doing that myself. I really need a new pair of shoes because I already have 20 pairs, but I don't. I want them. And Wesley is reminding us here that we need to take care of our own immediate needs and not always the things that we want. To give all we can is a way that we can reflect on God's generosity and thus participate in God's work in the world. We are to manage our money and our property to be able to use it for God's purposes. If we think about money as a spiritual discipline, then we can see the point is not to give away what we think is extra. The point is to play our role in distributing God's resources to everyone. Wesley's own personal commitment to finance, and here is where I'm a bad Wesleyan, I think is a little bit crazy. But he remained consistent throughout his life on living on 28 pounds. As a student at Oxford, he earned 30 pounds, lived on 28 pounds, and donated 2 pounds to charity. As he became more successful, as he wrote books, as he spoke to people, he earned more money. Say he earned 120 pounds, he lived on 28 pounds. He donated 92 pounds, and that's about the extent of my math. Wesley told his sister in a letter that money never stays with me. It would burn me if it did. I throw it out of my hands as soon as possible, lest it find a place in my heart. He told people if at his death, if he died with more than 10 pounds in his pocket, then he should be called a robber. When Wesley died, each of the 6 paupers that carried him to his grave received a pound, and there was no more left in his pockets. All of the draperies used for his funeral were taken down and made into dresses for the poor women in London. The widow's standard in our gospel reading is consistent with Wesley's standard, one that exceeds a simple tithe, giving to God all that is God's. This standard is radical and inspiring to some and frightening to many and completely terrifying to me. I'm not good at following Wesley's example. I am nowhere near good at following my niece's example of 33.3% giving. Granted, the girls don't have bills or student loan payments or a desire to buy a house, but I would be an absolute hypocrite if I stood before you and asked you to do something that I haven't been able to do yet. I don't have the courage to do it yet. I'm nowhere near giving a standard tithe. I'm afraid. I worry about money like everyone else. Do I have enough? Can I pay my bills? Did those huge college financial screw-ups ruin my financial life? I worry about these things, and yet I find a way to spend stupid amounts of money on stupidly expensive coffee from Starbucks every month or every week. Somewhere along the way, I have gotten wrapped up in the wants of the world, and I have forgotten to focus on what I need. I'm quick to remind my nieces and nephews of the things that they want versus what they actually need. And yet I struggle with that myself. Our gospel lesson this morning shows a wonderful example of the widow investing in hope. We have a wonderful example of John Wesley investing in hope. Complicated from my vantage point, but I know what I'm doing right now is not good enough. I know that I can do better. I can invest more in the ministries of this church. Yes, I am a staff person, and yes, I love working here, but I know how much these ministries mean to people. I know how much Sunday school means to children and adults, and the choir means to all of us, and toilet paper, Joe Prin, means to us, and Post-it notes mean to us, and I did not use one this week. I'm being a good steward of my resources. I need to stop giving out of my abundance. I need to freely and joyfully give to God first, and not if everything works out last. I know that I can only speak for myself, but I can do better. I can be more like the widow. I certainly can benefit from being more like Jesus. Don't know so much about John Wesley, but I can try. I don't want to give out of abundance. I don't want to give because I feel like it's an obligation. I want to give because I want to invest in hope. We all need a little more hope in this world. As we continue in this season of stewardship, let us explore the many ways that we invest in hope as we continue to explore the ministries here at Hillview and the ministries we engage in our community. I leave you with some wise words from St. Francis of Assisi, who said, "For it is in giving that we receive." And I also leave you with an offering prayer that my church in California said every Sunday of my childhood that I could rattle off the top of my head, but I never once stopped to think about what it meant. "O God, our hope, transform our gifts and our givings into ministries of love and compassion for all the persons this church serves in your name. And may it be so. Amen."